If you've ever been to China, or if you've been chronically online enough to have your feed blessed by Chinese reels and TikTok clips, you've probably seen something like this already. Just two people going bonkers with their spit battle. It's actually insane and absolutely disgusting. And this time, I have to agree with that. It is a big problem in China that's been going on for decades. But it's unlike any problem you've ever encountered in your life so far. It's a problem so normal. It's not even a problem anymore. Well, at least for these two lovely gentlemen here, and like 80% of China. But for the rest of the world, this is something you don't want to see every day when you get out of your house to head straight for work. Today, I'm gonna show you why the Chinese spit and why the hell they even consider this normal in the first place, which is crazy considering it goes as far back as the Roman Empire, so stay tuned. Now, let me ask you all a question. When do you guys spit? For me, I rarely spit unless I have a bad cough and I have the need to get the phlegm out. Even so, it's not something I do out in the open because I still want to spit in the toilet bowl or on the sink. For like the rest of the world, that's basically what you'll consider quote-unquote normal. But in China, it's really different. Ask anyone from Chengdu or just about any tier 2 city in the country, and you'll be met with a different answer. Hell, you don't even need to ask, because if you live in China, you'll see it against your own will. Middle-aged people, from your aunties and uncles to your regular grandmas and grandpas. Literally every single one of them is revving up their throats like it's a chainsaw, powering up a biohazard projectile, like they just achieved a 25 kill streak in Call of Duty. In the West, it's considered gross and rude. People will side-eye you as if you've just set an orphanage on fire right in front of their eyes. In China, there's this deeply held belief that if you're keeping phlegm in, you're keeping the trash inside your body, and that's bad. It's like keeping badly placed furniture in your house because you took advice from the worst feng shui master with 5 followers on TikTok. Spitting is the only way to remove the trash from your body. But why do they even do it? Surely there's a logical or medical reason behind it, right? Well, did I mention they have this deeply held belief about it? It has something to do with the way the Chinese viewed medicine. So I'm sure you've heard about traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM. If not, go watch the Apothecary Diaries, or better yet, sit back and watch me explain. If you've ever been to Thailand, not for the very obvious reasons, but to a Thai massage spa, or just about any Asian massage parlor, you'll know how they pretty much always have the same arrangement for their services. Acupuncture, cupping, herbal medicines, tuina massage, these are just some of the traditional Chinese medicine practices we still see today. And one of these practices is basically just spitting. And I'm not even kidding. Spitting used to be incredibly common in ancient China, and it's very well documented. The emperor, the counselors, the bald eunuch with evil schemes, the jade warrior, the dragon warrior, everyone you could think of, they all spat. And for good reasons too. Spitting is actually a 2,500 years old tradition, and not just an insanely disgusting habit that old people in China are still doing to this day. It has been so deeply ingrained for 2,000 years that they can't even stop if they wanted to. But there is actually a much worse truth behind the spitting, and I'm about to spit out the facts. So, back in 1949, the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, won the civil war and pulled a Stalin. But instead of adopting straight-up Russian communism and throwing bodies into the war machine, they wanted their own brand. It's Maoism, baby, and it's all downhill from here. With this victory, the stage was set for China's future. But right now, they only really have two options. They either have to rebuild, industrialize, and take the world by storm, or they can become a puppet state of the West, the same way it turned out for Japan and Korea after World War II and the Korean War. Not really ideal for them since the Japanese didn't do crap for them ever since Nanjing happened, and the country was pretty much still in ruins after the 2 wars they've participated in. When Mao initiated the Great Leap Forward back in 1958, he wanted China to transform from an agrarian society into a socialist industrial nation. Imagine China turned from a Farmville economy into like the freaking galactic empire. It's a damn great deal, but it's a deal they sure would regret. Because not even 5 years later, the Chinese government started doing some damage control by reversing the whole situation. What often gets overlooked here is that even after the famine eased, the environment people lived in had already been permanently damaged by the overabundance of factories, which in turn smoked the hell out of their bodies. Like literally, the policy changes didn't even help, because people were still dying on the streets despite the government countermeasures. It's even worse, because people are literally getting smoked, as industrial production exploded, often without regulation, planning, or consideration for the basic safety of everyone. China entered a new crisis they've never experienced before, with over 3 million factories in the country going wild with CO2 production and millions dead like they're still in the Three Kingdoms. China was in a worse situation now than when they started. What's more, cities like Ainshan, which used to host the largest steel production facilities at the time, were getting polluted, not just the sky, but the rivers as well, and at a very rapid rate, turning China's industrial growth against its own workers and citizens. The rapid industrialization, combined with the increasingly hostile pollution from the factories spawning like rabbits all over the country, was a catastrophic health problem. People's lungs were paying the price for the country's ambitions, like a great leap forward, except everyone goes straight into the meat grinder. Oh wait, that's basically like what happened in Russia, which they're still doing till this day. When you live in a city full of smog, the only way to let it out is to spit. Industrial pollution massively amplified this behavior. More smoke meant more coughing meant more phlegm, and more phlegm meant more spitting, often in public because there was simply nowhere else to put it. Imagine walking down a street and you immediately start taking damage over time. But that's not even the worst part. Before the Great Leap Forward, the Chinese government was already campaigning against the rise of an illness far more sinister than they had ever faced in the past. It was the early 50s and the newly established CCP was still in its infancy. It's going great as the CCP expanded into new sectors like banking, heavy machinery, and mining. But rebuilding a country, mind you, a very large country, from the ruins is far harder than just starting small, like Taiwan. Because before they can even leap forward to greatness, China is already hitting rock bottom, fighting against something even more concerning, tuberculosis. In the 19th century, tuberculosis accounted for 25% of fatalities in all of Europe, which was about 1.5 million deaths per year. In China, the TB-related deaths were not thoroughly documented. People died like flies left and right from war-related causes, and no one's listing them as casualties of illnesses like malaria or syphilis. From 1950 to 1962, it was estimated that at least 1 million Chinese citizens died per year from TB alone. On average, that's about 12 million dead from TB out of the 552 million Chinese citizens. It doesn't sound much until you account for the fatalities from the Great Leap Forward, which caused up to 55 million deaths from starvation. People are dying, and in comically large numbers. That's enough to fill countries worldwide. Now, you have 67 million deaths, and 1/5 of that was from TB alone. TB was moving like Prime King Von back in the day. After both World War II and the Civil War, the CCP started to campaign against tuberculosis. The marketed spitting is one of the few ways the body uses to resist TB and get rid of the phlegm. But this was where they actually made a grave error. So the thing about TB is that it's very contagious. You can't just tell everyone who's coughing so hard from TB to stop coughing, because you said so. Now, if you have hundreds of millions of coughing people turning the entire country into a large petri dish to culture its growth, you're absolutely cooked. So what happens when you normalize spitting for thousands of years as something healthy and market it as one of the ways to survive a rapidly growing nation, which is still recovering from the war? Well, it's another crisis, like a tuberculosis outbreak. But luckily enough, China didn't suffer as much as it did in the 60s. The world's understanding of TB was already becoming more available and widespread. From 1962 to 1999, China's growth as a powerhouse in the world economy didn't exactly turn its citizens into a walking biohazard weapon. But the spitting barrage continues as industrialization brings more factories and pollutes more cities and provinces. Between 1990 and 2000, there was at least 36% reduction in TB cases all over the country. But for 30 years since the 80s, many people still believe that spitting cleans your body. They didn't manage to exclude spitting from their usual habits. So all of the campaigns about TB, despite the reduction in cases and fatalities, went down the toilet bowl. People are still spitting on the streets, all because this was what Gen X and Ys grew up with, which was made even worse by a brand new crisis the world was not ready for. Enter the early 2000s. If you're a rice farmer somewhere in Guangdong, you're probably more familiar with this than most people. It was November 2002 when it happened. At first, it didn't look special. Several people started having high fevers, dry coughs, and some were struggling to breathe. But whatever, it's normal, right? It's wintertime, and people thought it was just another winter illness, or the flu. But this one didn't exactly go away. The sick patients weren't recovering, and the doctors tending to these patients started getting sick too, which was soon followed by the nurses. This was SARS. Before this, the government basically let people rev their throats, like a Honda Civic, at 2 a.m. because they had bigger fish to fry. But once people started dropping in international airports, the CCP realized they couldn't really become a global superpower, or at least be accepted as one, if their main export was biological warfare, because that's exactly how you turn everyone against yourself.
If I had a nickel for every time China exported a coronavirus internationally and gained the hatred among the entire rest of the world, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
They had to pivot from telling people spit out the trash to hold it in, or we're all cooked. It was the first time the state realized that 2,500 years of TCM tradition was basically a giant petri dish for a global lockdown. And spoiler alert, the world will be hit by a global lockdown in less than 20 years. But back then, they didn't know any better. Actually, the entire world didn't know any better, which was made even worse when 2008 finally hit. For most people, 2008 was like the 2012 of Gen Ys and millennials, but instead of a cataclysmic Mayan prophecy, in the US, there was the Lehman Brothers and the stock market crash, like it's 2001 all over again. So basically the same thing. Well, that sucks. But at least we had GTA 4, Metal Gear Solid 4, and Fallout 3. iPhones were starting to become popular, and the internet wasn't filled with AI slop as it is now.
Easy. 99 what? How does he see me? Through the smoke, he
These teammates are useless.
For the rest of the world, it's pretty normal so far. But 2008 was also the year China hosted the Olympics in Beijing. This was China's chance to show the West they weren't just a giant factory with a red flag and Jackie Chan. They wanted to look high-tech, polished, and most importantly, clean. They knew that if a scout from NBC or a gold medalist from London got hit by a stray biohazard projectile while walking to the bird's nest, the PR disaster would be worse than the Great Leap Forward, as if they turned it into a trilogy. Suddenly, spit-watching squads were roaming the streets like ICE agents looking for an illegal immigrant to deport. They were handing out fines and spit bags, all to cull the spit fest. They basically tried to force a vibe shift on 1 billion people in 6 months, telling everyone to act like they've seen a tissue before, so the tourists wouldn't get the ick. But this really didn't fix the problem. It sure did lessen it, but there's a major problem between the people who lived through the 80s and 90s versus the people who were born after the SARS outbreak. There's a massive difference in the perception of people who spit versus the people who find it absolutely disgraceful, like they're willing to sacrifice their entire generation just to be seen as normal as the rest of the world. I'm gonna give you exactly 5 seconds on why Gen X doesn't find 67 funny. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's because of the generational shift, and I'll explain why. The generational shift I'm talking about is basically the massive lag between 2 different generations, between the Gen Zs and Alphas, and Gen X and Ys. Part of this was because spitting was considered cringe by the Gen Zs and Alphas. Older generations may still spit, but less frequently and more discreetly, sometimes. There are still some rare cases where spit battles become a battle of cursed techniques and spit expansions. Rural areas, however, often retain older habits due to slower infrastructure improvements and enduring cultural beliefs. China is not monolithic. Habits change at different speeds across regions. If you walk through Shenzhen right now, it's like 2 different timelines are lagging on the same server. It's weird because a lot of people see China as this super advanced country, but at the same time, there are still uncles and aunties spitting on the streets like they weren't informed about why they shouldn't do that. And the very disgusting truth is that every society has practices it later deems uncivilized. Western countries once spat as openly as China did, yet Western history often forgets this. I mean, who in their right mind would put King Charles V used to spit as part of their, I guess, cleaning rituals to remove the Black Plague or whatever? Public spitting in China was never purely about manners anyways. It was about medicine, environment, poverty, and survival.